This is a continuation of the series, The Life of Ibrahim alayhi salam, from last week on Thursdays and Fridays. Last week we covered the early life of Ibrahim alayhi salam, his discovery, or rather mainly his discovery of monotheism of Allah Azza wa Jal, his complete denial of the ways of his people, the worship of his people, of idolatry, of polytheism, the worship of the sun, the moon, the stars, the worship of everything besides Allah Azza wa Jal. And so Ibrahim alayhi salam, as a quick recap, he discovered, or he introspected within himself. He asked himself, are these things that the people worship, are they really truly worthy of worship? Are they truly worthy of my worship? And after some short introspection, he discovered, or he realized that no, they are not worthy of my worship. And he turned towards Allah Azza wa Jal. And then he went and spoke to his people. He spoke to his father. He spoke to his people, and then he spoke to his father. Individually and with the greatest amount of adab, he spoke to his father, told him that, Ya abati, inni qad ja'ani min al-ilmi ma lam ya'tika fattabi'ni. Some ilm, I have received some knowledge, some guidance, some hidayah. Something which I hope to disseminate to you, that you may understand, that you may recognize the wrongs in your ways. And Ibrahim alayhi salam spoke to his people, and his people did not listen. And he told them again and again, and they still did not listen. And we find this in the lives of many anbiya. We find this in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In fact, it is a theme of one of the things that we will cover today, that الناس أعداء لما جهلوا. The people have enmity towards, or are usually enemies of things which they are ignorant of. الناس أعداء لما جهلوا is an Arabic saying that people are enemies of what they are ignorant of. And we find this to be true, that a person, he has some knowledge or some understanding of something, and then someone comes along with something new, something different to the way they are doing it. And naturally, the first instinct is to go with whatever you've done for however long you've been alive for, or however long you've been doing that thing for. And that's the case with not just religion, not just things with dogma, but also in normal practice. If you have an engineer, he's been working on cars for many years, 20, 30 years, and he has a particular way of doing something, and then a young upstart comes along and says, no, I went to college or I went to university and they said do this. That engineer of 20, 30 years, naturally he is going to say, no, I've been doing this for 30 years, I know the ropes, I know the better way to do it. And often that is the case, that experience beats just simple book knowledge. But that's not necessarily always the case. That's not necessarily always the case. There are obviously instances where someone younger, someone who's thought about something can offer something different, and especially with things which we take for granted. Especially with things that we take for granted. So something we've been doing for very long without much thought, without really thinking about it, and someone comes along and says, here's a better way to do it, there often is something behind that. There's usually a reason why that person has broken away from the norm, broken away from what everyone else is doing, and chose to go their own way, because they found a better way to do something. So, الناس أعداء لما جهلوا. The people, and likewise Ibrahim alayhi salam's father, they denied what Ibrahim alayhi salam was saying. And so in the second session that we had last week, we spoke about how Ibrahim alayhi salam, he pretended to be sick. He said that I am not feeling well. And there's a hadith which mentions that Ibrahim alayhi salam only lied 3 times in his entire life. And in the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam, you find some incredible qualities, some of which we've already covered. For example, the adab that he had. And I mentioned how we will inshallah go into more detail on the adab that he had in further or later part of this series. But I mentioned about how the way he spoke to his father, the words that he used when talking about Allah Azza wa Jal, the adab that he had generally, and also when the angels came and they were going to inform him about having a son, and then that they were going to destroy the qawm of Lut alayhi salam. He had an incredible amount of adab. When they came, he presented them with food. The way the manner in which he did his things showed a huge amount of refinement, of cultural refinement that Ibrahim alayhi salam had. So we find in him an example to follow, an example, and majority of the Anbiya are as such, but Ibrahim alayhi salam especially. And Ibrahim alayhi salam and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam are incredible examples to follow in the way they did their things. So Ibrahim alayhi salam spoke to his father with a huge amount of respect, and he told him, these are the things that I am preaching to you. I am hoping that you would listen to me. But they did not, and eventually he went and he destroyed the idols. And I was mentioning about how the 3 times he lied. So one of those times was there when he said that I am not feeling well. The other time is where we will inshallah be coming to today, when he said, or he accused the idol of destroying the other idols rather than taking the blame himself. And thirdly, there's an instance of where a king stopped him and his wife, Sarah alayhi salam, and that king was quite taken by the beauty of Sarah alayhi salam, and he asked Ibrahim alayhi salam, who is she to you? So he said, she is my sister. This is a bit of a semantic play. Really, Ibrahim alayhi salam was trying to say that she is my Muslim sister, and technically is not much of a lie. But if one was to take the strong moral position, then those were the 3 times that Ibrahim alayhi salam lied. Anyhow, Ibrahim alayhi salam said to his father and his people that he is sick, and while they were away in their festival, Ibrahim alayhi salam took an axe, destroyed the majority of the idols, with the exception of one, the biggest one, and he hung the axe on that one, and he left. And he went back happy with what he had done, back to his home. And so that's where we left off. And we had 3 major themes from last week. One was the quest for truth. One was Ibrahim alayhi salam's quest for truth. He was not satisfied with what he saw around him. He was not happy with the fact that these people were worshipping all of these kind of things. And in fact, he chose to come out of this cocoon, this little place where he was of idolatry, of polytheism, and metamorphose into something which was much more greater, into monotheism, into belief in Allah Azza wa Jal, and belief in the one God, which is Allah Azza wa Jal. So one was a quest for truth, and I mentioned about how last week this is one lesson that we can bring into our life, that every single time where we are presented with information, religious or otherwise, we should have that idea that if I don't know, then I go to people that do know. Again, religious or otherwise. So when it comes to religion, it's even more important. When we don't know something, we can't satisfy, or we cannot simply search on Google, look for something online. But rather we should have an affiliation with the ulama, affiliation with people of knowledge, that we can ask them questions and see what they say. And often they will know better on how to do the research to give us the answers. Likewise, in matters of religion, we go to the people of knowledge in religion, and in matters of dunya, in matters of the world, in matters of health, in wealth, in terms of managing our finances, whatever it may be. We have a quest that we try to find out as much as we can the source or the best knowledge, or the best information that we can possibly get. It's not enough that we simply sit back and accept any information that we receive and take it to be true. And one of the hadith that I mentioned last week was كَفَى بِالْمَرْءِ كَذِبًا أَنْ يُحَدِّثَ بِكُلِّ مَا سَمِعَ, that it is enough to render a person a liar. It is sufficient to render a person a liar that he spreads amongst the people whatever he hears. And this is unfortunately a plague of today, a pandemic of today, that we find on our Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, whatever it may be. We find that often information that we receive without checking for the veracity of it, without checking for whether it's true or not, without checking for who sent it or what reason it might have been sent for, we send it forward. We send it forward to everyone on our contacts list, or we share it. And sharing it is essentially forwarding it to everyone. If you share it on your WhatsApp status, if you retweet it on Twitter, if you share it on Facebook, or even like it on Facebook, other people that follow you will also see it. So that this sharing of information, it does not behove a Muslim. It is not fitting for a Muslim to be as such, to be so frivolous when it comes to information, when it comes to people's lives, especially. So I mentioned one was the quest for truth. Secondly was the bravery that Ibrahim alayhi salam had in standing up for what he believed in. He was completely and fully dogmatic. He was sure about the truth that he had come to recognize. And finally, I mentioned the respect that Ibrahim alayhi salam had And on that point, I mentioned about how when we speak to other people, Muslim or non-Muslim, we should have that much respect in them, that this is a human being. This is Allah Azza wa Jal's slave. This is a person who Allah Azza wa Jal created, sent to this world. It is my responsibility that I give them the best guidance that I can possibly give them. Well-wishing, or having good hopes for people, and doing it in such a manner that pleases them, doing it in such a manner that they might listen to you. We find this in the life of the Anbiya, we find this in the lives of the Sahaba, and the lives of many of our pious predecessors, that it's not simply about giving people the truth, it's also about giving it to them in a way that is palatable, in a way that they might appreciate it, in a way that they will listen to you. Simply, throwing it on their face, people often, when they are presented with truth, even though they may know it is truth, and we're going to come to this inshallah, even though they may know it is truth, but depending on the person it is coming from, because of arrogance, or depending on the way it is presented to them, because of arrogance, a person might turn away. And it is unfortunate, and the blame is fully on them. On the day of Qiyamah, the blame will be on them, but also on us. If we do not present that information, if we do not present Islam in a way that is palatable to people, in a way that they might want to accept it, then it's on our head that we failed in our mission. When Rasulullah ﷺ sent messengers to all of the different aqwam, to all of the different nations and all of the different rulers, the way they approached those rulers, the way they came to them was in a way that was acceptable, that was a norm, that was seen as befitting for messengers to come in front of people. Rasulullah ﷺ had a ring made, and he had that ring made for a specific reason, because the rulers, they did not accept any letter from anyone if there was not a signet, a stamp from the person showing that this is a ring from someone of authority. So Rasulullah ﷺ also understood this. So we have to, and the hadith says, أَنزِلُ النَّاسَ مَنَازِلَهُم, that lower people or treat people according to their status. And every single person has a, even the lowest of the low, at the very least they are a human being. At the very least they are a person who Allah Azza wa Jal has created, who Allah Azza wa Jal feeds, who Allah Azza wa Jal looks after, who has good deeds and bad deeds, who can go to Jannah. And so we have to have that respect when we are presenting our deen to other people. So that's a quite lengthy recap of last week. But moving on swiftly, this week inshallah, or today, we will be covering the discussions that Ibrahim a.s. had with the people, the fire that he was then thrown into, and the discussion he had with the king, Nimrod or Nimrod, before he left and went to Haran, which is a place away from where he was living. So the people returned from where they were. The people were in that festival. They crossed back over the river. They came back to the place where they were. And one other small thing is the fact that there is a river there gives indication towards the fact that the city was a large city. And I mentioned last week also that the place where Ibrahim a.s. lived, the place was called Ur, Ain or U-R or Ain Waw-R. And the people that live there, one is that the city's name, there is some discussion behind it, but one is that it's called Ur Kasdim, which was a small town, and another one is Ur, which was the major city of the country. And if it was the major city of the country, one would assume that these people were fairly advanced. So when we look at the discussions that they had, when we look at the amount of people that must have been present when Ibrahim a.s. walked out of the fire, and the fact that word got to the king that this boy has walked out of the fire, it must have been a fairly large spectacle. Enough people must have heard of this. Enough people must have seen this. Again, when we talk about Ur, there is Ur actually means city. So if we take it to just mean city, then it must have been the biggest city. Ur, like for example in Jerusalem, the word Jerusalem comes from Ur and Shalim, or Ur Shalom. Shalom meaning peace, or Shalim means the god of the Canaanites. So if we take it, so Ur actually means city, and if Ur is city, and these people are this is a fairly metropolitan city of a lot of people, and these people were also fairly advanced. They were the main city of a large kingdom. Then again, looking at the context of the situation, we see that this young boy, Ibrahim a.s., coming and destroying all of the beliefs of these people, it's something great, it's something huge. when we see it through that context. So it's important also that we see it through that context. So anyway, they returned from over the river. They come back, they come to their temple, and they find all of their temples, all of their idols have been broken. So the Quran mentions they came back and they said, قالوا من فعل هذا بآلهتنا إنه لمن الظالمين. Okay, they said, who's done this to our gods? بآلهتنا إنه لمن الظالمين. Indeed, he is amongst the wrongdoers, amongst the oppressors. So they eventually realized that قالوا سمعنا فتى يذكرهم يقال له إبراهيم, that we heard of this boy. He's always talking about them. He's always mentioning them, saying something bad about them. يقال له إبراهيم, they call him Ibrahim. So again, it's also something that we can take from this is يقال له Ibrahim would denote would allude to the idea that these people that came back and saw the idols broken did not know Ibrahim alayhi salam specifically. So there was a fairly large group of people. If it was a small town and everyone knew each other, then they'd know immediately that Ibrahim alayhi salam was a name. So they wouldn't say they call him Ibrahim. Again, so there was a fairly large group of people. And then they eventually called Ibrahim alayhi salam in front of all of them. And they said, قالوا أنت فعلت هذا بآلهتنا يا إبراهيم, that was it you who did this? Did you do this? And Ibrahim alayhi salam, like I mentioned last week, he'd planned all of this. So he said, قالوا بل فعله كبيرهم هذا فاسألوهم إن كانوا ينطقون. No, the biggest one, look, he's got the axe on his shoulder. He's the one that did it. Ask him. Ask all of these idols that you've got here. Clearly the broken ones you can't, but ask this idol here, who did it? So فَاسْأَلُوهُمْ إِنْ كَانُوا يَنْطِقُونَ. If they can speak, why don't you ask them? And again, he told them before that these idols don't talk. They didn't listen to him. So again, he went out of his way to show them that they actually don't listen to him, or they don't listen to them. So فَرَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ فَقَالُوا إِنَّكُمْ أَنْتُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ ثُمَّ نُكِسُوا عَلَىٰ رُؤُوسِهِمْ لَقَدْ عَلِمْتَ مَا هَؤُلَاءِ يَنْطِقُونَ. Now this is, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions that they conspired amongst themselves, they concurred, they came together and they spoke. So because obviously now that they were presented with some evidence, they were presented with a bit of a dilemma. So Ibrahim alayhi salam had challenged them, and they had to rise to the challenge. They had to give an answer. So if they openly just said, they don't talk, Ibrahim alayhi salam's point would be proven. So they came back to themselves, they conspired, they sat amongst themselves and they said, no, there's something wrong here. إِنَّكُمْ أَنْتُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. They actually told each other that, we're wrong. Then Allah says, ثُمَّ نُكِسُوا عَلَىٰ رُؤُوسِهِمْ. The incredible thing is, Allah says, ثُمَّ نُكِسُوا عَلَىٰ رُؤُوسِهِمْ. Nukisu, the word nukisa, actually refers to a person who relapses after a period of convalescence. Yani, a person, he's getting better. He was ill, he's getting better, and then suddenly relapses. So a person's getting better and then relapses. So nukisu ala ru'usihim means to fall back on what you earlier believed. To fall straight back onto what you earlier believed. Yani, you were on the path to hidayah, but bang, straight back where you were earlier. So we find this many times whenever the Anbiya spoke to the people, that there was a point where hidayah was within their reach. Hidayah was right there, but they fall straight back into the pit that they came from, because they could not accept the cognitive dissonance that was presented to them. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological thing where holding two contradictory ideas at one time. So for example, like I mentioned earlier actually, you have one piece of information, you have one belief, again, it can be about religion, it can be about anything else. You have a belief about a certain thing or about the way a certain thing works, and then someone comes and presents you new information. Now you've got two contradictory ideas. And human nature, naturally, is that we go towards the thing that we already had, because we are naturally, again, selfish. We have that within ourselves. Allah mentions in the Quran that we are selfish in Surah Adiyat, that we are a person, humans naturally, Allah has created within us that selfish nature, that jealous nature. So we choose our side rather than someone else's side. But that cognitive dissonance, that for that brief period of time that someone gives us new information, there is this small little window of opportunity where we can take something new, assess it, appraise it, evaluate it. Is it worth taking in? Is it actual good information? Should I accept it? And this is where I mentioned last week about investigating. About, take this information, is it true? And if it's true, assimilate it into what you believe. If that means replacing what you earlier believed, then yes, replacing what you earlier believed and adopting this new belief. But if it's not, then you can rid yourself of it, you can throw it away. But this idea, this part where you have older beliefs and you have something new, and you have to battle between the two. You have a certain idea of something, and then you have something new, and you have to battle between the two. That is where the difference between the mu'mineen and the kuffar is usually made. Yani Allah Azza wa Jal, the responsibility of the Anbiya is to deliver the message. It's not to get them to hidayah. So it's there in front of them, and if they then take it, that's up to them, and if they don't, that's up to them. But that's that part, that's the pathway where it dichotomizes, where it bifurcates, where it goes on either side. So this is where they were. This is where they were. This was the crossroads which they were at. So Allah Azza wa Jalla says, ثُمَّ نُكِسُوا عَلَى رُؤُسِهِمْ, meaning they were on the way to recovery. They were almost there. They said, إِنَّكُمْ أَنْتُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. They said, we are the wrongdoers. We're the one clearly in the wrong. He's got a point here. The idols can't talk. They can't do anything. He has destroyed them. They've done nothing to him. And clearly he's hung the axe on the big one. So the big one should be able to tell us that, it was him that did it. And we can't prosecute him. We can't take him away and kill him, or we can't do anything to him because that would be injustice. He's done nothing wrong. We don't have any proof of him. There was no one here to witness any of his crimes. There was no one here to see if he was truly the one who did it. The only witness here seems to be the big idol. So they were almost there. Just about touching it. And then ثُمَّ نُكِسُوا عَلَى رُؤُسِهِمْ. They reverted back to their old ways. They came back to what they earlier believed. And this is also a very important lesson for us as Muslims, as humans, as people, that when we are presented with new information, when we are presented with something, in fact, this is a question which we should often ask ourselves, that if we were not born as Muslims, and we should say Alhamdulillah that we were born as Muslims, but if we were not born as Muslims, would we after being presented with Islam, would we believe in Islam? Remember, I mentioned last week about how the people of Ibrahim alayhi salam, they said, وَجَدْنَا آبَاءَنَا لَهَا عَابِدِينَ, that we saw our forefathers, we saw our dads and mothers and everyone else, the whole family, everyone worshipping it. We saw all our people before, they were worshipping it. These idols have been here for 100, 200 years. They have all been worshipping it. We're just following what they were doing. We're just doing exactly as they were doing. So Ibrahim alayhi salam coming and presenting something different, you're the odd one out. You're the different person in the room. So Ibrahim alayhi salam had to come here. He's come here, presented something different. They are saying, why should we believe you? وَجَدْنَا آبَاءَنَا لَهَا عَابِدِينَ. We've been doing everything that our forefathers were doing. So if we were not born as Muslims, if we did not have Iman from the beginning, where would we be? And firstly, that's a lesson because it allows us at the very least to do shukr of the Iman that we have. But secondly, also, it allows us to evaluate how questioning we are of ourselves. How much do we actually think? How much do we really think about Allah Azza wa Jal? And truly, the Muslim is such a person. And I say this, obviously, if we are already Muslims, one might say that, I'm already a Muslim, what's the point in me questioning my belief now? But no, it's not simply about questioning the belief. It's about now finding. It's about becoming a better Muslim. It's about recognizing truly Allah Azza wa Jal, having that ma'rifah of Allah Azza wa Jal. Because, when you're born a Muslim, you don't quite appreciate it. When someone becomes a Muslim, they appreciate it a lot more. So, and the fact of the matter is that the majority of us, na'udhu billah, if we were not born as Muslims, we can't say much for hidayah that Allah Azza wa Jal gives, but it seems unlikely. Because there's not too many people. Islam is the fastest growing religion, but it's not exactly, millions and millions on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. We don't know for sure 100% that we would have accepted Islam. And people can be, like I mentioned also last week, people can be very clever. Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَلَقَدْ آتِينَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ رُشْدًا. We gave Ibrahim alayhi salam incredible intellect. He was clever. But also, وَجَاءَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. He came with a clean heart. So many people are very clever. In fact, if we go into history, we will find the Romans and the Greeks, incredible civilizations in their own right. And even today, we find many people incredibly acute, very, very bright, very intellectual people. But unfortunately, their beliefs seem almost, the mind boggles how someone might believe something like that. But for them, it makes sense because they will say the same thing. وَجَدْنَا آبَاءَنَا لَهَا عَابِدِينَ. We found, or we've been brought up like this. Our parents were born like this. They told us to believe it, and that's the road that they followed. That's everything that they've done again and again and again, and that's what they followed. If you look into the history of the Romans and the Greeks, the Greek gods, when you think about it, or the Roman gods, or some of the beliefs that some religions have, barely make sense. But you, again, like I mentioned, very clever, very intellectual, very astute people believe in it. They still believe in it. And as I also mentioned, Ibrahim, it comes in the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, in fact, that whenever he used to speak, whenever Allah Azza wa Jal mentions about him in the Quran, when he spoke to the people or when he spoke to the king, Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَحَاجَّهُ قَوْمُهُ قَالَ أَتُحَاجُّونِي. And then when he spoke to the king, Allah says, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِي حَاجَّ إِبْرَاهِيمَ. The word hajja comes. Hajja is related to the word hujjah. Hujjah is an evidence, dalil. And hajja would literally mean to adduce, to present evidence, to cite evidence for an argument that one is making. So Islam is such a religion that we have, alhamdulillah, is a religion of dalil, of hujjah, that we have over every other religion, that we have over every other people. We have these dalail, we have these hujjaj that we can present over other people. This hujjah that we have over people with the Quran in itself, and many other things that we can present, Islam makes sense in its entirety. There is nothing about it which boggles the mind, which seems nonsensical, which doesn't make sense, which one has to do semantic gymnastics to try to understand and try to make sense of. That's one of the good things about. That's one of the incredible things about, and it is also a dalil of why Islam is a true religion, that we have this that we can present as evidence against other people. So coming back to the original point about وَجَدْنَا آبَاءَنَا لَهَا عَابِدِينَ, they all believed in this despite being intellectual people. And I mentioned about how this was the main city. This was a people, there were very, very clever people. There were people of various intellects. And they were all there. And they understood that they were in the wrong. And yet still, they persisted in what they believed in. Because they had this idea of tradition, because of that cognitive dissonance, because they couldn't accept that all of these people could be wrong, or they didn't want to change, and this fear of change stopped them from having that. And Islam promotes, maybe I'm going on a bit too much about this because we've only got 20 minutes left, but Islam promotes this idea that we should be inquisitive of our deen. We should be inquisitive of the world around us. We should try to discover Allah Azza wa Jal through His creation. Through His creation. So Allah Azza wa Jal in various places in the Quran, أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ يُزْجِي سَحَابًا ثُمَّ يُؤَلِّفُ بَيْنَهُ أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ يُزْجِي سَحَابًا, that Allah Azza wa Jal has created the clouds. He gathers the clouds and He moves it to one place. Allah mentions the cycle, the rain cycle. Allah mentions in other places about how He's created beasts of burden. He's created many different animals which can carry us and which can also carry stuff, the burden that we carry, or our materials or our wealth to different places. Allah Azza wa Jal mentions about how He's created the seas in such a way that that ships can float, and we can also do business and trade across the oceans. Allah Azza wa Jal mentions in different places about the trees that He's created, about how wind helps the rain cycle, or how many different things Allah Azza wa Jal mentions, and He does it so that we can look in the earth, so that we can look in the heavens, and we can try to see the Creator in there. So that we can try to see the Creator in there. In fact, in Islam, we don't have any. We are very open to the idea of thought. even almost blasphemous thought, as long as it doesn't become political, if it's academic, purely academic, we find in our history that Islam has allowed it, for the most part, has allowed it. And for the simple reason that we are confident in our deen, we are confident in our religion, that if anyone comes and tries to debate us on our religion, we can stand there with our dalail, with our hujjaj, with our evidences, with our arguments, and we can defeat them. There's nothing that we are afraid of. There is nothing scientific, logical, anything we are not afraid of. And many other religions we find, Christianity, Judaism, and many other religions, we find that they are actually quite scared of this. They try to shut down thought. We, in America, in places across the world today, we find that they actually try to shut down thought. They try to stop people from advancing in the sciences, in the humanities, in many other different fields of knowledge. But Islam doesn't say that. In the golden age of Islam, we find, in fact, we also find that in Christian thought, in Christian philosophy, there is an Islamic element to it. Islam plays a major part in the way that Christian philosophy, or the way that Christian theology came about. And that's because Muslims were very, very open. Muslims were questioning of themselves because they understood that we found the deen. We are 100% truthful. We are 100% sure that the deen is correct. We know the deen is correct. And so anything you want to throw at us, because it will only make our deen stronger. And that we found in the life of the Sahaba, in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, when مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ. That from the believers, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions in the Quran, that from the believers, there were those who realized, وَصَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ, they were truthful to what Allah Azza wa Jal had promised them. They knew when they were in the depth of the battle, when they were completely surrounded by the enemies, and they saw all of these things happening, and maybe the tide of the battle was turning against them, or maybe they were in extreme difficulty. But they still realized, no, the truth is here. The truth, Allah Azza wa Jal will help us. The Prophet ﷺ is speaking the truth. The Quran is the truth. And so whatever you throw at us, it will only increase us in our iman. It will only increase us in our iman, and it is in that difficulty, it is in that challenge that the iman is increased. Because at the end of it, when Allah Azza wa Jal gives the victory, that's when the iman really receives a massive boost. And so that applies on the physical side when it comes to battle, but also on the side of evidences, on the side of academics, on the side of arguments. We are confident in our deen, we are confident in our religion, and anyone can throw at us, we are confident that we will be able to rebut that argument, we will be able to stand up and speak up for ourselves. And this is what we find in the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam. This is something that we can take from the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and also a lesson that we can take from the people around Ibrahim alayhi salam in a sort of negative sense. There's another saying in Arabic, as-sa'idu man wa'idha bi ghayrihi, that the fortunate person is that person who takes advice from others, but not just from others, from the misfortune of others. Yani they see other people doing wrong, and in observing those people doing wrong, they realize that that's something I shouldn't do. And this is one of the things that is mentioned about Luqman alayhi salam, that Luqman alayhi salam, one of the things that when he was asked, how did you become so wise? How are you in this position that you are in? He said that I used to watch other people make mistakes, and after watching them make mistakes, I used to realize that this isn't something I should do. So we take lesson from the people around Ibrahim alayhi salam, that they were almost at the place of truth. They were almost there. Because they didn't want to try something new, because they were scared of something new, they said, no, we're going to turn away from it, we don't want it. So continuing on with this, they turned back on what they said. They said, لَقَدْ عَلِمْتَ مَا هَؤُلَاءِ يَنْطِقُونَ. They acknowledged, they told Ibrahim alayhi salam openly, لَقَدْ عَلِمْتَ مَا هَؤُلَاءِ يَنْطِقُونَ. You know, these idols, they don't speak, they can't talk. So Ibrahim alayhi salam said, if that's the case, قَالَ أَفَتَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَنْفَعُهُمْ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَضُرُّكُمْ. If that's the case, then why do you worship besides Allah these things which مَا لَا يَنْفَعُكُمْ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَضُرُّكُمْ? They can't help you, they can't benefit you in any way. وَلَا يَضُرُّكُمْ. If you don't obey them, if you don't do ibadah of them, وَلَا يَضُرُّكُمْ, they can't do anything to you. So then Ibrahim alayhi salam says, أُفِّل لَكُمْ وَلِمَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. He completely divests himself of worship of them, and also of the things that they would worship. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. He says, why do you guys not even think? Just the slightest bit of thought will allow you to examine what you are currently in and realize that what you are doing is wrong. So they turned around and said, قَالُوا حَرِّقُوهُ وَانْصُرُوا آلِهَتَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ فَاعِلِينَ. Famously, they turned around and said, look, we can't do anything else, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up a big fire and we're going to throw him in it. And we find, again, in the life of the Anbiya, in the life of the Sahaba, in the life of many pious people, there are so many stories. For want of time, we can't go into those stories, but there are so many stories. For example, one of them is in Allah Azza wa Jal mentions in Surah Fajr, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. Ashabul Ukhdud were the people of the pits, where there's a very famous story of this young boy who was, there was a sahir, a magician who used to practice magic within in the court of a king. And he was getting old, so he said to the king that, I'm getting old, I need an apprentice. So the king said, okay, fine, find a young boy, and the young boy will work with you, and he'll learn from you, and he'll practice whatever. You can teach him your ways. When you pass away, he'll take over as the sage of the court. So the young boy used to come, but on the way there used to be a rahib, a priest, or we can say a pious person, and the priest the pious person used to speak. I say priest because it was in the time of Isa alayhi salam, but really he was a Muslim. The pious person used to speak to people. The young boy listened to him, was affected by him, was overcome with whatever the person was saying, and he eventually began staying in his company. So the young boy used to go to the sahil, used to come back from there, speak to the pious person for a little while, then go back home. And eventually what used to happen is, along the way he'd stop where the pious person was, spend a bit of time, and because of that he'd get late at the magicians, or on the way back he'd get late with his family. So the pious person told him that when you are late with the magician, then tell him that my family held me back, and when you are late with your family, tell them that the magician held me back. So eventually it came to a point where he used to go and he developed his iman, his yaqeen in Allah Azza wa Jal. And then what happened was, one day he was passing by, he was on his way to the magician, and along the way there was an animal or a predator on the road. And people were scared. They couldn't go past. This was a common pathway where people used to go past, and they couldn't go. So he said, he made dua to Allah Azza wa Jalla, Allah, this is the time that I find the truth in you, so help me in this. So he took a stone or a rock, he threw it at the animal, and the animal was killed. So finally he went back to the rahib, the priest or the pious person, and he asked that person, or he told the person the story. So the priest said to him, look, now you've come to a point where your iman is at a level where you will be tested. And again, we find this and I mentioned this story because there is a certain relevance to the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam here. Ibrahim alayhi salam reached a level of iman where now he will be tested. And again, we find this in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. We find this in the lives of Sahaba. Allah Azza wa Jal mentions in the Quran, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولَ الرَّسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. That do you believe? Do you really think that you are going to believe? أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تُتْرَكُوا وَلَمَّا يَعْلَمِ أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ. That do you think you're going to enter Jannah after having believed, without facing some kind of difficulty, without facing trials and tribulations, without being shaken to check whether your iman really is true. So this boy, the priest told him, look, your iman has now reached a level where you will be tested. And so the test ended up being that people realized that this boy had a certain connection with Allah Azza wa Jal. So people used to come to him for their various illnesses, for other things, and he used to be able to, through the power of Allah Azza wa Jal, he could help people. And so what ended up happening is, in the court of the king, there was a certain person who had an illness. So the person came to that boy, he heard of this boy's reputation, so he came to him and he said to him, look, I've got this illness, can you cure me? So the boy said, I don't do any curing. I don't, heal anyone. I can't do anything. I've not got any magic potions. There's no apothecary here. There's no, hospital here. I have nothing. All it is I make dua to Allah Azza wa Jal. All you need to do is bring iman, believe in Allah Azza wa Jal, make dua, and Allah Azza wa Jal will cure you. So the person did so, and he became cured. And so he went back to the court of the king, and the king saw him, and he saw that he'd been cured of his previous illness. So he asked the king that, so the king asked him that, what happened? How did you get cured? So the man replied that my Lord cured me, my Rabb, my Allah, He cured me. So the king said to him that, look, there's only one God here, there's only one Lord here, and that's me. So the person said, no, I have an Allah, He is the Rabb of the Samawat and Ard, He is the one who controls everything. And so the king took him, he tortured him until he gave him information about the boy. The boy was brought before the king, and the boy was tortured until he gave information about the priest or the pious man. The pious man was brought, and the pious man was told that renounce your belief in your Rabb. He replied in the negative, and so he was killed. Likewise, the court minister was told, renounce belief in your Rabb. He said no, and he was killed. And now the boy was told that you should renounce belief in your Lord. He said no. So the king told him that, told two people from his court that take him up to the top of a mountain and throw him down to kill him. So he was taken all the way up. The boy on the way there, he made dua. The mountain shook. The two people who were supposed to take him, they were killed, and the boy returned. And the boy didn't escape. He came back to the court of the king. Because again, as I mentioned last week, the responsibility of anyone who has hidayah is to spread that hidayah, is to disseminate that hidayah as far and wide as possible. And so that boy understood his role. So he came back to the king. And so now the king said, what happened to your two companions? He said, Allah saved me from them. So the king now ordered two people or some people take him on a ship and ask him to renounce his Lord. And if he doesn't, throw him over and let him drown. Again, same thing happened. He went on the ship. He was taken all the way there. He made dua. Allah caused waves to envelop the ship. The others died and he came back. The boy eventually came back to the court of the king again. And then he spoke to the king and he said to him, there's only one way you can kill me if you really want to kill me. So the king said, what's that? So he said, okay, I want you to gather everyone. Bring everyone here, the entire people of the city, make a open proclamation that anyone wants to come to this meadow, come to this place to witness something. So they all came, and he said, when they come, I will give you a bow and arrow, and I want you to say before you shoot the arrow that in the Lord of this boy, in the Lord, Bismi Rabbi hadha al-ghulam, in the Lord, in the name of the Lord of this boy, and then fire the arrow. So the king called everyone. Everyone was brought there. The boy was put up, made to stand in one place. The arrow and the quiver, the arrows and the bow was given to the king. The king said it, Bismi Rabbi hadha al-ghulam, fired the arrow to shoot at the young boy, and he killed the young boy. But now the problem was that the people saw this, and the people, they believed now in the boy. They understood that there is no divine reality there is no divine nature to this person, to the king, because he's made a proclamation, and they heard about the story. So they all became believers. They all became believers in the Lord of this boy, yani Allah Azza wa Jal. And so the king heard of this, and so he ordered for pits to be dug, huge pits to be dug, and they were to be filled with logs and filled with firewood, and in a similar manner to the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, to be lit on fire. And all of those people who said that they believed in the Lord of that boy, they were to be brought there and to be killed. And so when Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions qutila ashabul ukhdud, ashabul ukhdud is the people of the pits, that they were killed. And all of these people, they were brought, and one by one they were all killed. And in fact, a story is mentioned that there were 3 children who spoke in their infancy, And one of those, obviously we know one of those is Isa alayhi salam, when he was young. But also one of those was a mother was bought who had bought belief in that in the Lord of that boy. She was brought close to that pit, and she was asked, renounce your belief, and she was about to. Yani she was on that precipice. She was on that, just about to renounce her belief because she was scared, and she held her baby in her hand, and so the baby spoke, and she said, "No, mother, the path that you are on is a true one. It's fine if you pass away, but don't renounce your belief." And she was killed. And this is the story of Ashabul Ukhdud, the people of the pits. But again, there is a familiarity within that story, and also the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. But Ibrahim alayhi salam was now bought. And again, the reason I also mentioned that story is when you come to a particular point where the people, they cannot accept the truth that is in front of them, what they end up resorting to is violence. People end up resorting to violence. And I mentioned earlier of النَّاسُ أَعْدَاءٌ لِمَا جَهِلُوا, that people are enemies of what they are ignorant of. People have a certain antipathy to what they are ignorant of, and so they had this enmity towards the deen. They had this enmity towards Ibrahim alayhi salam. So they said, let's gather firewood, let's build up a massive fire. And in fact, the fire that was built is mentioned in many narrations that the wood that was gathered was so large, so big, and it became almost like a religious obligation. So you had people, if they were not feeling well or if they were sick, in a similar way that we give sadaqah when we are sick, when we are not feeling well. What happens for me, if inshallah, this happens for me, then I will fast this many days, or I'll give this much money in sadaqah, or I'll build a well here, or I'll build a masjid. People, when they were sick, when they were ill, they used to make pledges that I will donate X amount of firewood for the fire of Ibrahim. And for almost a month, they gathered firewood, and they kept it in one place for the fire of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And again, this also indicates towards the magnitude of the matter that was at hand. That for one whole month, all of these people, because they were so entrenched in their belief. In fact, when we mentioned before about Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he speaks to his people, he says, he mentions that Akifin, that why are you so devoted to this thing that you worship? The word Akifin, in fact, is similar to the word i'tikaf. When a person is completely devoted to something, Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions, وَلَقَدْ آتِينَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ رُشْدَهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَكُنَّا بِهِ عَالِمِينَ إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ وَقَوْمِهِ مَا هَذِهِ التَّمَاثِيلُ الَّتِي أَنْتُمْ لَهَا عَاكِفُونَ. That why are you so devoted to this thing? They were completely and totally devoted to the worship of these idols, to the worship of these things. So when someone comes and someone opposes them, when someone is standing up and going against everything that they believe in, that person is now a complete apostate. That person is a renegade. That person deserves the harshest of punishments. And so naturally they were all against him. So they built the biggest fire. And also, if we're collecting for 1 month, and mention is made in many different narrations about how big the fire was and all of these different things, all of that, when taken into consideration, one understands the context of the situation, how many people there were, how big of an issue it was. And so all of them gathered together, they built this fire, and they lit the fire, and Ibrahim alayhi salam was to be thrown into this fire. We don't have a very long time left. There was a lot more to be covered, but inshallah tomorrow we will continue with the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam and his discussion with the king. But just to finish off here, they eventually gathered all of this fire and they lit it, and it was said that a bird that would be flying overhead would die because of the heat that was emanating from this fire, the scorching heat that was from this fire. The people that were observing from so far away, they had no way of getting Ibrahim alayhi salam into this fire. So one narration is mentioned that Shaitan came in the form of a person and he gave them an idea, or he gave them a way to throw Ibrahim alayhi salam over and into the fire, because they had no other way. The fire was so large that they couldn't get close enough to get Ibrahim alayhi salam into the fire. So inshallah we will continue tomorrow about Ibrahim alayhi salam, where Allah Azza wa Jal mentions قُلْنَا يَا نَارُ كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ. Allah Azza wa Jal made the fire cool for Ibrahim alayhi salam, But inshallah, that's tomorrow. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.